Hello out there, world, and welcome to another episode of Wheel Bite. Full disclaimer about this episode. It was the first one we recorded for this season, even though it's the later one we're putting out. There may be a few peppered references to it being the first episode of the season. That's bullshit. Anyways, this week we come in with a hot take on some stuff, and we talk about what it means to be an underrated skater. We disagreed a lot on this one, which always makes for good banter, but it really came down to the idea of what actually makes someone qualified to be underrated. Is it how history writes them into the books of skateboarding? Is it a matter of personal perspective? Is it a matter of geographical location and the time that you are skating in? We never really came to a full conclusion, but we debate this issue quite a bit and bring up some of our favorite underrated skaters. If we forgot one of yours, I know we forgot Danny Fuenzalida, which is a sin on our part, but can't get them all in there. So I don't think this is the last time we will be having a discussion about being underrated, if I'm being honest. So here it is, the definition of underrated.
Welcome to San Francisco.
Don't skate here.
I feel like it's dangling by a fucking strain of bone marrow.
East Coast powerhouse.
From New York, I stab you in the Western Wall.
Carter, it is fucking Friday the fucking 10th.
I'll give you $100 and I'll take out the Benihana and you slide that 75-foot handrail.
I especially like the flip of the board.
Season numero trace of the Wheel Bite, Bites of Wheels. We are back. I'm your host, one of two, Ted Theodore Mater. And with me as always,
Jay Green here. What's up? We're back. Who'd have thought we would have made it 3 seasons?
with no funding. But we're doing just fine.
We still don't fuck with whoever doesn't fuck with us.
Which is a long list of people.
Nah, just kidding. We fuck with everybody.
Yeah.
All the haters, too.
Send donations if you feel fit. We're going to kick it off with a topic we've actually wanted to cover for a while, but weren't quite sure how to do it. And we want to discuss the ever-expansive Hall of Fame of underachievers, underrated skateboarders.
Maybe not underachievers.
Well, it was a joke, man. Eastern Exposure 3, underachievers.
Okay. I feel like that's kind of harsh, but you're right. You nailed that one.
But yeah, so obviously we're going to intro with our favorite underrated skaters. You go first, man.
Okay. We'll get a little deeper into this as we go on. It's one of our talking points, but just a little, a thought is, I think a lot that has to do with an underrated skater is just perspective. The first one that always comes to mind as an all-time favorite, just an all-time favorite in general, but I happen to think he's been underrated, massively underrated his entire career, which is our guy Adrian Williams.
I had a feeling you were going to say
yeah,
him.
I mean, I've talked about him on probably every other episode of Wheel Bite, whether it was relevant or not. And he's just been a factor in Frisco forever. And I feel like he's had a career he's a little older than us. He's had a career that's spanned my entire skate life, more or less. And I got to see him go from the dude who just moved out here to SF and getting his little Logic spotlights. I don't you remember the Logic videos. He was getting some shine in those. And then to just really see him progress and move through and not slow down, but in my opinion, never landing that big sponsor that everyone felt he was deserved of, or he never got the right push, or for whatever reason, again, we'll go into all that, or unknown reasons, who knows, sometimes the stars don't align, whatever it may be. Yeah, he's one of my all-time favorites, and anyone you ask, I think, that's been in the Bay Area skate scene or knows the skate industry pretty well, I would say, if you say name 5 underrated skaters, I think Adrian would come up in a lot of people's lists.
Yep. Yeah, he's one of the Bay Area's best, for sure. Anytime you see him skating in person, it's always fucking amazing.
Also a really nice guy.
Yeah, it helps that he is,
which is a
very
rarity
friendly.
of skateboarders. PSA.
Yeah. Why does everyone gotta vibe so hard all the time?
Bunch of cool guys out here.
I overall have one, but I do want to give a quick shout out to like mid 90s era Deluxe, because I felt like all of those companies back then like hosted a ton of dudes who just like have forever remained under the radar. Folks like Joey Bass and like, dude, I loved Kelly Bird's footage that he had with them, and then like Mike, I can never pronounce it right, Daher, Dar, I don't know, I've never been good at that name, but those are people that were like all so good when they were on the Deluxe squad there, whether it be Real or Stereo, or I mean, shit, man, even fucking Kelch to an extent. Like,
see, I think this is going to be a constant thing with this episode. I would not ever call Kelch underrated.
Really?
No.
Okay.
I think Kelch got a lot of shine. Kelch may have got more shine that was warranted for his skateboard. Like, he was an amazing skateboarder, but that's not why I think, for the most part, he got so much attention.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely attribute him more to a personality above skater, but I felt like, his part in the Real video was fucking sick. And, like, he was just in that lump of, like, Deluxe dudes who, like, maybe had 1 or 2 parts at that era, and then, like, just were gone. But, moving on from that, get to the real meat of this, who is your favorite underrated skater. Like, I just have this place in my heart for that era of Deluxe, like, random dudes who had 1 part or 2 parts or whatever. But my all-time is Mike Maldonado for sure.
Dude, we're gonna disagree so much.
Dude,
I definitely don't think Maldonado was ever underrated. Maldonado was one of the dudes who was dominating ad space for a while.
But I think, yeah, he might have been dominating ad space now, but when you look at, like, where he stands in the history of skateboarding, like, he's just kind of, to an extent, been, like, swept under the rug by a larger chunk of skateboarding's audience.
I can see that.
That is, like, under a certain age.
Sure.
And, like, this is a whole other thing that we're going to be diving into as well. But, like, that's why, for me, like, he had such a strong career for so long with, like, Welcome to Hell, Jump Off a Building, Baker 2G. He was throwing down. And then once he was off, like, a major company, he was just, like, cut completely out of the picture.
Sure.
Like, you never really saw footage of him, not even like many guest tricks. He didn't dominate ad space as soon as all that happened. And then when you ask most kids today, probably under the age of 25 or 26, maybe even a little older, like kids who didn't grow up watching Welcome to Hell and shit like that, they don't know who the fuck he is. And that's like the biggest issue with like where a skater is properly rated, a lot of it has to do with time and place and what media you're exposed to when you are getting into skateboarding.
You're totally right about, if you think, it helps me if I think about the imaginary history book of skateboarding, if you will. And yeah, I guess you're right. Maybe Maldonado probably wouldn't get the proper shine, even though at one point he was a heavy hitter.
Like, I don't really remember him having... He might have had a cover, but, like, I don't remember him gracing the cover of a bunch of magazines at the time, and therefore, like, it is easy to be rewritten out of the history books a little bit, because, like, you have a couple video parts, but that stuff is only really relevant based on time and place. Skill and skills will get you super far, you know, but the way that we appreciate certain skills for like a period of longevity after the career is based on like so many different things. Like, you look at the guys like the Andrew Reynolds or the Tom Pennys, like, they're still skating to an extent, maybe not nearly as much as they used to be, but
well, those are the forefathers that are at least of like our generation of kind of like more modern street skateboarding. Those are the forefathers that will, like, in the history book of skateboarding, will definitely be like, you know, most remembered, those dudes.
Yeah.
And, you know, basically because of Tony Hawk Pro Skater too.
well, yeah, but Tom Penny wasn't in Tony.
That was half a joke.
Okay.
I was half
I was
kidding.
about to fucking school your ass.
I know Tom Penny, the game would have been way sicker. I know he wasn't in it.
But yeah, like, those dudes, yeah, they are, but there's other people lumped in like that I think were as skilled, if not more skilled than those dudes at certain points.
Sure.
Who were just as groundbreaking, and they still don't get the shine. And, like, again, like, if you're not sponsored by a major company to an extent, and unless your name holds so much weight that you can just have your own company, then it's not going to translate forward to future generations.
Well, we are also potentially talking about maybe two different things of how we remember skateboarders as opposed to kind of like what I was saying, like in their prime maybe, or like to the point of like when they were getting the most coverage and attention. You know, I think it's kind of two different things. Well, I mean, of like how the industry and skaters will remember them forever, as opposed to like someone like Adrian, kind of like my point, where it's like he's had, you know, he's of course had some ad space and some legendary video parts, but he never reached a Maldonado.
That's okay. I can understand.
You
your
see
point
what I'm
there.
saying?
Yeah.
So he never, with his mind blowing talent and being such a good dude, wiggling through the industry, like, you know, he never reached that height.
No, that's a good point.
What does it even mean to be underrated? What goes into those factors of someone, you know, because look at someone like, and you know, I don't want to take anything away from anyone's skating in this episode, but look at someone like Terry Kennedy.
Okay.
Where Terry Kennedy was marketable. He did big rail tricks. Never the most, I don't know, he's done some gnarly stuff, but like, I don't know, maybe to compare the two skaters is tough, but he didn't have the most mind-blowing trick selection forever. But with the people he was aligned with, Baker, was on MTV, Bam Margera, whatever that craziness was, he got all sorts of crazy in skate outside of just the regular pop culture world. He was in a ton of magazines, had all sorts of big sponsors, shoe deals, and all that. You know what I mean? So I guess my point is like what goes into it? Is it a marketing thing? You know, is skill involved with certain skaters? Is it your location?
Well, I was about to say, I wanted to bring up the idea of location because you're talking about Adrian here and how he has kind of flown under the radar for as long as he has. I feel like that whole generation, like that era of San Francisco, like 2003 plus, like, I always felt like that generation kind of got snubbed, with the exception of, like, you know, Jack Curtin has, you know, rose to the top of all this. But
he was like kind of a leftover-ish from like, like Pier 7 day. He kind of is like
that's
straddles the line.
That era, like after Pier 7, where like you just didn't see the same like love and coverage of San Francisco anymore. You had that era where like Rob Welsh and those dudes were all on top, and then like it kind of just started to pander off. And a dude like Adrian, and he's in there with like Trevor Prescott and the whole season's video hype, which was all very much like low key. And some of the dudes from that video, like Brian Della Torre, has fucking a part in one of those season's videos, but
Silas has a part.
Yeah, like some of those dudes align themselves with the next right group of people.
Certainly no lack of talent.
No, not at all. In De La's case, though, he aligned himself with that like GX Bombing Hills
years later.
Yeah, but he aligned himself with that while Adrian was still more on like the tech side of things, which I feel now in the grand scheme of San Francisco, that tech era is like somewhere else.
That's a really good point. I mean, as far as like San Francisco skateboarding and what's being covered, that's a good point, but he was also smack dab kind of in the middle of that, like Third and Army, Pier 7 days, like Embarcadero shit, later older Embarcadero scene. He was smack dab in the middle of that, and this isn't really gonna be an episode about speculating why.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go on forever with our personal opinions.
Well, Well, yeah.
I mean, that's the show, actually.
Well, the why.
I think a lot of it has to do with, how do I put this? How do I say this in a PC way? I think a lot of it has to do with like the cool guy circle. Honestly.
Well, yeah, it's the politics of it all.
Adrian's always, he's like not, kind of keeps to himself a little bit, and he's not the most like in your face wild dude. Maybe that has something to do with it. And as we go down and list other skateboarders that came to our mind, like maybe we can find similarities.
Well, one person we didn't write down, which I don't know why, because this has come up a few times, and this plays into the idea of politics, but like Danny Gonzalez.
Oh, that was actually one of the first people I thought of when we were talking about doing this episode.
I don't think anyone has gotten more properly underrated than Danny Gonzalez.
Yeah, well, for a few
that's
reasons.
The thing, like the politics of the industry and how he burned a couple bridges for not even necessarily doing anything.
Well, that's a little harsh again too. Like maybe it was more like the skate industry lashed out kind of unnecessarily.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I don't think he did anything that really warranted his blackballing from the industry the way he was done. Like, the way I understand it is he just quit a deluxe team, and they were like, we can't believe you're quitting like this. Like, I mean, they had a lot of turnover in that era, as we already discussed.
Darrell Stanton.
Yeah, another dude who I think his fate was similar, but I actually feel from what I've read about him that was kind of warranted, because I've heard he's kind of like a cocky, egocentric.
He had a very fast rise to fame in the industry. So,
and the whole time I guess he was just burning bridges. But Danny Gonzalez, like, has totally been written out of the history books, and he's technically the first person to have done a flip trick over Wallenberg. Like, and he did it twice.
He was doing a lot of fucked up shit around the Bay Area and in the industry, and he was getting some propers for a minute, and then he had that injury and whatever happened. Like with Deluxe and the industry politics, he seemed to kind of vanish. That's another dude we kind of bring up semi often on the show.
Well, because I feel like that's like
It's real.
I mean, that's one of the things about the industry that's so fucking whack, that they've just like left this guy out who was such a fucking innovator.
Yeah.
Like, dude, fool was doing like one-footed manis on Pier 7. Like,
he was way ahead of his time.
It doesn't get any more tech than that.
He was way ahead of his time, definitely with trick selection.
But I mean, among all those reasons, like, we could look at any number of our favorite like underrated skaters, and we could figure, like, one of the reasons we just listed, whether it be politics, translating their skill, like where and when and who they're rolling with, like, you could trace it to any one of those reasons.
I think the easy crutch for people in this argument or discussion is sponsors. So, like, clearly you have, like, now, or always, there's always been your big hitters, your heavy hitters, your giants in the industry,
right.
You know? So it's a good point. We should have wrote down each person's sponsor, like, all these dudes we listed, because would you ever say someone from Girl Chocolate Family is underrated?
I would say most of them are properly rated.
Well, exactly. Like,
the only one who may be on that squad is like underrated because he gets the least like shine, but he's been on the team the longest at this point, is like Jerron Wilson.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the similar with like the Mike Maldonado thing, where every dude who was on that squad at one time was not underrated. They had the biggest platform in the industry. You know what I mean? But I don't know, I could probably go down that list and still tell you some old folks that I think in the history books, Sheffy would probably be still underrated a little bit for what he was doing at the time in the power switch skating and stuff like that. And
again, the kids today don't even know
Tony Ferguson, and, you know, but again, like, at one time those were some of the biggest names in the industry. So yeah. I guess, like I said in the intro, you know, it's kind of all about perspective and what time period you're talking about. Let's go into, I want to talk about this dude, Travis Stenger. I don't even know if I'm saying his name right.
I'm gonna guess you are.
And I found out about this guy recently, within the last couple years. Never heard of him before, and it was through Instagram, and it was like one of these posts like, the greatest skateboarder you've never heard of. He's Canadian.
Of course.
Yeah, of course, right? Either Canadian or Brazilian. He seemed, now that I look back on his footage, he seemed to have like a decent amount of footage out there and coverage. Maybe it's just because we have, at that time, I think it was like probably late 90s into early and mid 2000s is when he was pushing it the hardest. And we, you know, had our American blinders on always, you know, but we've gotten a handful of Canadian skaters that we paid attention to over the years, but this dude is like another level with style, trick selection, spots, consistency, and everything. Like, he's one of my favorites at this point, and I've only seen a handful of video parts from him. Have you heard of him before I brought him up?
Nope.
Okay, so there you go.
That's the point.
So this dude would be like an extreme case of, like, even probably, like, you know, Adrian had some major sponsors throughout the years, but like, you had never heard of this guy. So where does that fall on the underrated meter?
The thing about today is that I think it's a matter of oversaturation. Like,
yeah, well, this is a completely different time that this guy was skating in, though. You know,
I mean, but that's why I feel a lot of skaters today will never get the due that they're necessarily deserved, just because, like, even fucking 20 years ago, the shit they would have done would be groundbreaking. Like, again, like, this just even proves my point forward. I don't even know the fucking dude's name, but he came out with that edit like years ago that was seen around the web because it was like him skating in this abandoned water park. He's doing all the like freestyle shit.
Yeah.
That's like, but it's like so innovative and forward thinking. It's insane. And I couldn't even tell you the guy's name.
I can't either.
I mean, obviously, I know I can look it up, get his name, but this is kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is like, that's a dude who should be being marketed by some massive company or the mags, or have some crazy like Insta fame following, where like his skating supersedes skate culture because it's so fucking crazy, the way like Day One's Instagram account does. But that's just not the case.
I find it funny that a guy like Travis Stenger he might be getting more attention now than the quote unquote height of his career because of social media now.
Well, yeah.
He's getting more eyes on him because of some OGs are like, y'all don't know nothing about this dude, like, and kind of reposting and reposting. I think that's fucking hilarious to me, but kind of fucked up.
Yeah, you going back to the Pier 7 era.
Yeah,
like,
and this is like, for all the Frisco OGs, the most underrated of all. And this is like kind of like a Frisco thing where a lot of dudes who skated in the city were like into other city kid shit, and skateboarding was not always like their main priority, but had like this mind-blowing talent. I'm talking about Robbie Holmes. Not well known throughout the industry, didn't get a lot of coverage for a while. Another dude who had a part in a Seasons video. And you know, I really can't stress enough about seeing this guy skate in person. You know, nothing he did in any of his video parts or the few ads that he got would ever even come close to accurately portraying how fucking amazing this dude was. And you know, he had a couple spots. I think he was on Organica.
I was about to say he was on Organica, but again, Organica is like,
it was a blip for a while. Yeah, you know,
which is too bad because I thought Organica actually had like a good little thing going.
You know, they did actually. I should give them more credit than a blip, because they were on they were locked in with KO,
and they had a good team.
They had
Carl,
a sick team.
They had Walker Ryan early on, and Miles Silvas early on. Like,
Adelmo.
Carl was harboring some good talent there. And yeah, Robbie Holmes is a dude who like made sense to be on there too.
But you know, and I don't even know if I could say he was underrated, because the people who know about him, he's probably the opposite of underrated. He's like held up in the highest regard. Just the way he used to skate the pier and the things he used to do at the pier. I'm talking shit like no one even thought of or I'd ever seen do, like even close. He used to switch ollie over the not the middle pier block. For any of the real old pier heads who know it that well, he used to switch ollie over one of them and land on the stair.
Yeah.
So there's a 2-stair there, and he would land in this skin. Like, it's absurd, the things he used to do. And you know, he didn't have a real run in the industry. So I don't know, like, would you call someone, like, we have a good buddy, Steve, right? Amazing skateboarder, never got sponsored, nothing. Would you call someone like that underrated? You know, because Robbie's almost straddles that line of, like, if they never even really have a shine in the world, like, are they?
Well, that's kind of the eternal question of this episode, because like, we know that Steve rips, you know? It's something like...
But in our minds, he's not underrated.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, like, I have a friend back home who used to be able to 540 flip on command. I can remember him once going through our entire skate park, didn't do a single trick, comes up the ramp, he goes, and as he's coming up the ramp towards us, he just goes, I didn't do anything, I might as well 540 flip, and he just busts the most perfect 540 flip right there, not even like thinking twice about it. And we all just like broke out. Like, would I call him underrated? I don't know. He could, like,
he was just a skater.
He was just a skater, and like, I often feel that's part of it in our culture, you know, like, the act of doing it is just as great as appreciating it on a cultural level. Because my homie was telling me how he did a trick on the pier not long ago where he did a manual flamingo on the pier block.
Okay.
And he was like, he said part of the joy of it was that he was like, I'm the first person who have ever done this, probably. Like, that's such a weird trick. And then
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then like a couple of years later after he did it, he said
Maybe
he
you
saw
shouldn't
someone,
have told anyone about that either.
he said a couple years later he saw someone do it on Instagram, and like they got like all this like love and all these likes and shit, and he's like, yo, I did that shit first, but he didn't like care. It was just like, just the act of doing it was enough. But if we want to talk about like fame and someone outshining anyone, I want to go back to Maldonado for a second, but also I want to talk about his boy Kerry Getz.
Nah, I'm gonna put my foot down with this one, dude. Kerry Getz in no light ever will be underrated.
How can you say that?
I'm
He's not
stopping
even,
this.
dude. Kids today don't even know.
Dude, I'm not buying it, dude. They may not know, but Kerry Getz was like the top of the top as far as getting coverage. Dude, that guy had fucking a DVS ad in every magazine, I feel like, for fucking 6 years.
But the thing is, in the terms of the appreciation of the two of them, and I almost want to throw Tim O'Connor into the mix, because now people just think of him as that fucking smart ass.
I can get behind that. Tim O'Connor actually, I think, was, even though being a big name, I think he was still underrated
like,
for a while.
He's got
Style King.
Yeah, he had great style. He could rip a mini ramp. He could fucking skate street really well. Like, he
skated super fast.
Yeah, he was a great skater. But like, again, nowadays he's just like that guy who talks on ESPN with Chris Pastras.
I'm not buying Kerry Getz at all.
Damn, dude.
I'm not.
My point about the three of them is, though, like, I feel like the reason they've kind of just been like swept aside to an extent is because their best friend was fucking Bam.
Yeah.
And Bam was super famous, and it was always more about Bam.
Well, they kind of grew apart at the height of their career.
Of course they
too.
did. Of course. But that's what I'm saying. Like, they were all lumped in together, and Bam Mania took off. And I feel like as a result, some of those dudes got, like, just kind of brushed aside to an extent.
I think this is funny because we talked about this episode a little bit beforehand, but I think this is a good contrast. I think you're more referring to how we look back on skateboarding's history for like the kids coming up, which is valid. Mm-hmm. That's very valid to say that, you know, someone who once had such an important part of skateboarding is maybe doesn't get the shine that they should at this point. That's valid, but I think it's just interesting that we kind of have two different.
Well, I think you're looking at it. You're trying to look at it more as a nowadays, like, who's still out there and not getting the love.
Well, that and like dudes who went through and had the talent and had, you know, a little glimmer and looked like maybe they could have been on a path to getting to a Kerry Getz level. But, you know, just were, for whatever reason, again, like the mysteries of the industry were overlooked, you know. To move into, before we completely go into switch gears, kind of, would you say someone like Tom Asta is underrated?
See, I don't really, again, I don't know much about Tom Asta. He's on Santa Cruz. People really seem to like him.
So this is a dude who's like, everyone knows, if you have half of a skateboarding brain, everyone knows that Tom Asta is like amazing, like beyond amazing. Like
that's all I pretty much
he needs
know.
to be respected, right? So I would say yes, because you kind of answered my question just in that, right? He's floated around from board sponsors who kind of, to me, seem like maybe they haven't fit him the best.
Who was he on?
I forget who was he on. He was on Santa Cruz now. That's like, I don't know, does that say something that we can't list all his previous sponsors, you know?
Let's see.
I think it's a weird trade-off where like the people who really know skateboarding know he is like one of our generation's like masterminds, but the way like maybe his marketability is within the industry, and like, you know, the real consumers of skateboarding, which are ages 12 to 20, you know, I don't know if they will ever give a guy like that his propers.
It's an interesting point. He probably has some weird cult because, you know,
he does, of people like me who know about it, but like I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I think for whatever reason his name kind of popped in my head. I kind of associate these dudes similar with Adrian, who like float around from company to company and it doesn't ever fully seem like it is the right fit. And that's kind of my loose definition.
That's why I've always had appreciation too for some of those videos, like we brought up Seasons earlier, and like the static videos as well. Like they've always kind of highlighted that tier of like skater.
Totally.
And like, you know, they've always straddled that line really well between like the professional world and the underground culture, where, you know, sure, Bobby Puglio and Jamal Williams and those dudes who like at one point were names in the industry.
Yeah, but those are more like underground street skaters.
Yeah, like they kind of hold on to those values that are cut from a very specific cloth about what they feel a professional skateboarder should be. Not only that, what pushing skateboarding actually means.
And shout out to all those underground, underrated videos, dude. Those real fucking street, like, gritty videos. Those are my favorite shit.
Yeah, dude.
And that used to be, like, from my perspective as, you know, a kid in San Francisco, that is what we flocked to as kids, which was like, the more local, unknown on a big stage, underground skaters. And it used to be cool to kind of favorite underrated skaters.
Yeah.
You know, like it was, and I don't, you know, and I guess that's probably another location thing. That was like because those were the dudes who we saw skating around, who were sponsored by people like Western Edition, things like that, who were big names in our little city and circle, but never were reaching that top tier in the industry. And that was, you know, and you can even kind of like, for as big as they were, I feel like you can throw like Zoo York dudes in there a little bit too.
Oh, you definitely can, with the exception of like maybe like, because Harold Hunter was such a large personality. I guess technically he's like a couple steps above like the James Kelch type situation, where Kelch only had like a video part here. Harold always had footage coming out. He just was like, he's more remembered for being this larger than life persona.
He maintained his personality in the industry also up until his death.
Yeah, he was not going anywhere, and I'm sure if he were still around today, he would be like, he'd have his own podcast probably.
Oh, talking that shit.
Oh,
for sure.
yeah, dude.
Hell yeah. But do you feel like that culture has changed, or is that just a perspective thing because I'm from San Francisco?
No, I mean, I think that is a more of a location perspective thing, because what I was going to say to counter your thing about like, oh, you appreciated people like Adrian and Jabari and like people that you were seeing every day, like, you know, that goes to beckon the question again, like, is just these like unknown people that we grew up watching in our immediate areas that are not known by anyone, but just because they're homies, like, does that make them underrated in the grand scheme of things? Because while I was growing up, there were no, like, we didn't go places and just see dope skating going down all the time. I mean, there were places you could go. Like, you could go to Boston, you could go to Nashua, New Hampshire, which had a pretty good little skate scene going on up there, and still does, for that matter. And you could probably see some dope shit going down semi-regularly. But, like, as far as our immediate surroundings, like, we were just skating with our friends.
Yeah, but you grew up favoriting a guy like Jamie Thomas.
That's what I was going to say.
You
like,
know what I mean?
Yeah, our favorite skaters were the dudes we saw on the big posters,
right,
or in the shops, or, like, we'd go to the demo and, like, maybe some slightly underrated dude would, like, show us some love, and that would make us remember him, but he wouldn't just become, like, our favorite skater or anything like that. The only time I can really remember that happening was, like, I remember seeing Aaron Susky at a pretty young age when he was, like, he'd probably just come out with that America part, like, a year or two before. He wasn't quite, like...
Yeah, I mean, he's another one, dude.
Yeah,
Ricky
but, like,
Oyola.
we watched Aaron Susky, like, destroy it at this demo by our house, and we were like, oh, that's pretty cool. But, yeah, for the most part, dude, like... the favorite, like, underrated people like that dude that I have from my life, like, there were a couple dudes in my hometown who you just kind of hear rumors, like, oh, they did this, or, like, this guy, like, ollied this, or whatever, and then you'd see something that they would do in person, and you'd be like, oh, wow, that person really is that good. But it was more like legend than actual, like, appreciation, you know? You appreciate the legend more than what actually probably happened.
Yeah, no, that's a real thing with local skateboarders for sure. Well, do you think kids nowadays, I'm trying to think of, like, the culture of the San Francisco skateboard scene now compared to...
Well, I think the internet has changed everything, you know? You look
Absolutely.
at, like, if Instagram had come out 5 to 10 years before, I feel like a lot of people we know in our immediate circle would have a way bigger following.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately this podcast, every episode comes back to how the internet has ruined / made skateboarding great.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of this weird double-edged sword, and I guess that's kind of why this show even exists. We wouldn't have as many opinions if the internet didn't produce so much shit every single day. Much. But yeah, I do feel like one of the first things I remember that happened right when I moved here was the FTC Young Bucks dropped their first, like, big edit. It was the one, like, with the A$AP Rocky song, and it was pretty fucking sweet, actually. But they were all kids. Like, Nico Haraga was doing shit over the Stern Grove stage gap, and he was only 13. And it was like, okay, this is like a taste of the youth of this city, but those kids all grew up in the time of Instagram and figured out how to market themselves real quick and at a really young age. So that's why... Well,
paired with talent.
Well, of course. That's what I'm saying, though. Like, they had the raw talent, but they also understood how to put themselves out there in a way that could foster a following.
Sure.
And once
they had a big advantage of just being from this generation.
Yep. So now they're all like, you know... John Perez just had a fucking spread in Thrasher.
Yeah.
He's been on the come up forever, and he'll likely become a properly rated skateboarder.
So with the floodgates wide open now of social media and the internet, do you think it's easier to be swept under the rug, or do you think it's easier to create some kind of buzz for yourself? You know, is it easier or harder now with the wild social media internet craze? I
think it's harder
to be underrated.
I think it's easier to be underrated, but I think it's harder to stand out. I mean,
okay, yeah,
like there's all the dudes who can like do the crazy tricks, like dudes who can like triple flip down fucking 5 stairs, or people like dark sliding weird rails. And like, as much as I love the like innovative like tricks, at the same time, like, because there's so many of those dudes, how do I distinguish one guy from the other than like some sort of winning personality trait. Instagram doesn't really necessarily allow
And
as much personality
there's
to
just
show in that
so
realm.
many more people skateboarding now in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's the hugest thing.
I think it goes both ways. I think that, a kid from bumfuck middle of nowhere who's amazing could create a career or whatever you want to call it, some kind of following or buzz around himself or herself, just because of Instagram. And that's this platform that we have. However, I do agree with what you're saying, that it's so oversaturated that it's just almost impossible.
Well, it's oversaturated too, and because of the way things are, I feel like, I bring it back to like the Andrew Reynolds type guys, like who are still out there all the time and still posting content all the time. Like Andrew Reynolds keeps up with the shit. Chico, obviously, like killing the game. Like all these dudes have such a good Instagram platform, but then this goes back to our difference in like what makes an underrated skater. But like I primarily think of dudes like Jeremy Ray or Chris Markovich or Ricky Oyola, who like what they did at the height of their career is fucking legendary. But because of this modern environment that we're in with skating culture, I mean, the history books are kind enough to them, but you don't really see it the same way on the internet.
I'm really surprised with the skaters you've chosen.
Well, I think I don't know many kids who know Jeremy Ray. Like they all know Andrew Reynolds, but like when you bring up some of the shit Jeremy Ray did that was like massive, like 360ing the love gap and shit, like they just don't know.
Is that because they don't have some obvious? Eric Costin, still sponsored by Nike, has their own company. Is that because they don't have some obvious alignment, or not alignment, or just like they're not out there? They don't have such a huge stake in the industry anymore.
Well, that's what I'm.
Is it because
that's what I'm talking about? Is that like?
Because I don't like Jeremy Ray is a giant to me.
He's a giant to us because we grew up with him being that giant. I mean, dude, in the height of when you and I were getting into skateboarding, he was on fucking Element. And
right.
like frontside flipping on rocks.
And audio ads everywhere.
Yeah.
Like,
but kids today don't even know.
Or is it just because of this generation's attention span and they don't care too much about the history? Skateboarding has a very short history.
I think they do care about it because they obviously all these retro accounts exist and have massive followings, like Cool Mo Leo, Science versus Life, like whatever, Memory Screen. But I feel like those dudes' skill was so mind-blowing back then. I mean, to me, it's still mind-blowing now because you take it into context that it was a certain time and place. But like a kid seeing Jeremy Ray 360 the Love Gap today, they're just like, oh, it's just like another banger to them. Like they just can write it off. I do think history is important when it comes to properly rating some of this stuff. And that's why I think like someone like Jeremy Ray is super underrated in the context of everything. I mean, you can disagree with me on that, and it's fine. But like,
I do. I disagree with you.
But I just think at this point, like,
I also think that we're kind of talking about two different things.
I think we are too, but it's overall the same thing. Like, are the majority of good skaters underrated?
Right.
And I think the answer is yes.
Eventually,
for different reasons
I
each
think,
time.
Sure. I think yeah, and I think your point actually is a very good a good train of thought for that conclusion. Are all legendary skaters who at one point had such a big look on them, so much attention on them in the industry, I'd say, 7 out of 10 of them get forgotten.
Well,
And I keep thinking of Eric Costin for some reason as like my comparison. Definitely not underrated. Definitely got everything he could have out of the industry.
And still is getting things out of the
And
industry.
still is. I just keep like referring to him, I feel like, and he, you know, he's certainly not going to be forgotten in the big book of skateboarding history. And
Hell no.
and you know, Jeremy Ray wouldn't be forgotten in the big book of skateboard history, but I think maybe what you're trying to say is he maybe wouldn't get a full chapter like he should have or something.
Right. Well, I mean, look at it too in the context of any other sport. Basketball, football, whatever. You look at a team from a certain era, like you're always going to have the star players on any given team, but there's only so many like Hall of Famers to go even further beyond that. It's like, yeah, you'll always remember like Jerry Rice or Tom Brady or fucking one of those inbred Manning brothers. But
Shots fired. Jeez.
But there's so many other dudes who helped all those teams get ahead to fucking
shit.
to the where they were, but are just not remembered by the collective consciousness of the culture that surrounds the sport. Again, I think the biggest factor is time and place in all of this.
I think a lot of it is just perspective, honestly. I think it's everyone's definition is going to be changed, is going to be different, you know? I think, and everyone's experience with learning about skateboarding and picking out your favorite skaters is going to be different. So, you know, clearly we are a good example that perspective is going to be different for everyone, you know?
And I mean, you like what you like, and you remember what you remember. And
keep skating.
And
because
yeah,
fuck what anyone thinks.